Here we go, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, I had to change my name. All right, we'll just give everyone just a few more minutes in case we have a few stragglers coming in, and then we can get started.
No problem.
How are you, Chloe?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
Good.
How's the weather there today?
It's freaking cold.
Is it? It's kind of cold here too. Sorry, my face is like, it's really bright out here today.
It's bright here now, but it was 5 below when I got up this morning. Last night it was like blizzard, sideways snow. We got a foot of snow in like an hour.
Oh my gosh.
It was bananas.
Chris, where are you
Wow.
located?
In Lake Placid.
Oh my,
It
I'm
was-
so sorry.
It was insane. Now it's 4 and sunny. And so it's freezing cold, but it's really bright out. But yeah, last night was bananas. I mean,
Wow.
bananas. The plows couldn't plow the snow fast enough.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
It's
And it
like
was
a whole
40
different
the day
world
before.
there.
It is. It is. That's for sure.
All right, well, I think we've got everyone here with us, so we can probably get started. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We are here with Karen Heisig of the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and she's going to give us a presentation today and some information that hopefully can help save a life. I also want to thank our sponsors, our Monday presenting sponsor, Bellmark, and our Monday session sponsors, Hillebrand Beer Supply Chain and Keg Management Specialists, as well as Tri-State Carbonation Services.
It's Tuesday,
What day did I say?
Monday.
Oh, whoops. It is Tuesday, isn't it?
I'll tell you.
Thanks, Chris. So our Tuesday presenting sponsors. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Karen.
Thank you, Chloe. So my name is Karen Heisig, and I'm the Associate Area Director for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Central and South Central New York. So I cover that whole middle swath of New York, not quite over into the Adirondacks where you are, Chris, but quite a large territory, 16 counties. And we are, our New York State chapters, there are 7 of them, there are 6 staff people, and we are your newest allied members. And we're thrilled to be part of what you do and be able to offer some resources and insights, because breweries are a space where people gather and connect and have those real conversations, right? So it's important that you take care of your own mental health first off, and really watch the mental health of your friends and your family and know what to say, because it's an awkward conversation. None of us grew up having these conversations about mental health, and we're making some strides in this area about talking, but we have a long way to go. So if you want to connect with any of us, I'm sure, Chloe, if you can put my email address in the chat, it is kheisig@afsp.org, and you're more than welcome to connect with me, and I can put you in touch with the staff member and the volunteers that are in your area. Everything that we do is free. We do our big community walks, our engage in big events, and do lots of outreach. But the funding that supports that comes from those big events, and we give back to the community for free. Then, so we do programs for free, provide resources for free, whatever that looks like. So feel free to reach out and connect with us. I will go ahead and share my screen. If you do have any questions as I'm going along, please feel free to put them in the chat. Chloe will let me know if there's an urgent question that we really want to answer. But otherwise, I think you'll find that your questions are answered throughout the program. And if not, we have time at the end that we can certainly answer those. So with that being said, Chloe, you're good to go see my screen?
Yes, yep, everything looks good. Actually, it's not full screen though, your presentation.
Okay, yep, I'm gonna get on there.
But we can see it.
If I can get past the screen share to do from beginning.
I know it can be a little tricky once you get into screen share.
Yeah, it's not, usually you're able to
Maybe
go.
if you go to the bottom right, there should be a little symbol you can click. The one right, that one.
There you go. Thank you. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
See, I've been doing this for so long now, and I just learned something new. All right. This is a statement that I believe to be true. Talk saves lives. So this is meant to be an introduction to suicide prevention and taking care of our mental health and wellness. I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will take out some nuggets and take them back to your staff, your family, your friend, your neighbor, whatever that might look like for you, but that you maybe have a little bit more belief in this statement that talk saves lives. We know that suicide is a complex health issue. There's nothing that says that somebody just wakes up one morning and wants to end their life. This is a health issue. It's a public health issue, and there are things that we can do to prevent it. If you think about cardiac arrest, if any of you had warning signs that you might be at risk for heart attack, your doctor's probably going to tell you to do a few things, right? They're maybe exercise, eat right, take care of your health by managing your stress, maybe take a medication and do things like that. Our mental health is no different. Physical health, mental health, it's all the same. And when one suffers, the other probably does too. So suicide can be prevented. Maybe not 100% of the time, but it's nothing that somebody's ever going to go to a doctor and be diagnosed with depression or anxiety and told, I'm sorry, you only have 6 months to live. We know that mental health conditions are treatable, but it takes a proactive approach, right? Because if your doctor tells you to do all of those things to reduce your risk for heart attack and you go home and do none of them, you're doing nothing to prevent that heart attack. And mental health and suicide prevention are the same way. It's important that we're having this conversation. So today in this program, I want to give you a little piece of myself first. I come to you as a loss survivor. I lost both my husband and his younger brother to suicide. My husband was a pharmaceutical rep, and prior to that, he was an Army officer with the 82nd Airborne Division. His brother was a lawyer. Both had wonderful marriages and young kids. They were well educated. They were popular. My husband was the kind of guy that just lit up the room when he walked in. But none of that makes any difference. And oftentimes the person who's struggling is really going to put on that best face for everybody. So it's really important that we're paying attention and we know some of the facts. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the scope of the problem, the statistics. We'll talk about the research because that really informs what we know about risk factors and put somebody at higher risk. We're going to talk about that prevention piece and what we can all do to engage in protective factors. And then that really simple conversation about what can we do? If we're concerned about somebody else or ourselves, what can we do? So before we jump into all of that, I do want to say that how we talk about this subject really matters. Let's change our language. If we can change it from the things on the left of the screen, avoid saying things like somebody committed suicide or somebody had a failed suicide attempt, and instead say things like they died by suicide or maybe they ended their life. The challenge here is that most of us have been raised saying somebody committed suicide, and it's hard to change that language, right? But what does it imply? When we use that language, it often implies a lot of judgment, like somebody's done something that's really bad and we can't talk about it, like committing a crime. And the other piece of that is when we say somebody had a failed suicide attempt, it's like assigning them a grade. And there's no grade in this. There's nothing like being a family member of somebody who's made a suicide attempt and to hear it referred to as a failed attempt. And thankfully they lived, right? So the more we can change that, I guarantee you will hear me on your shoulder at some point in the future. You'll catch yourself saying somebody committed suicide and you'll go, oh, that woman said something about that and I know I'm supposed to change it. And that's okay. We're not, making a bad mistake if we use those terms. But the more we can change it, the more we start to ease the stigma and the shame around mental health and suicide prevention. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the scope of the problem. Most of you probably wouldn't know. Most people probably don't know because this isn't something that's taught in school, but over 800,000 people die by suicide every year throughout the world. These numbers are according to the World Health Organization. And part of that challenge is that these numbers are thought to be actually higher because many countries don't even have an accurate reporting system. What that means is that every 40 seconds, someone in the world dies by suicide. Their sense of hopelessness and despair has overcome any logical thinking, and they're just completely overwhelmed with the thought of, I need to end this pain. So every 40 seconds, someone in the world. In the United States, this slide hasn't been updated yet, but in the United States, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death. So in 2018, it was over 48,000 people. In 2019, for the first time in almost 2 decades, that number went down because we've seen a steady increase over the years. But in 2019, before the pandemic hit, that number actually decreased for the first time in a long time. And that's important to know because it means maybe what's happening is we're making it a little bit more okay to reach out, right? And when you think about the largest number of suicides that occur, it's in white males 45 to 65. And I can guarantee most of you know somebody in that age bracket, right? So over 70% of suicides in the United States are white males 45 to 65. So knowing that and knowing that maybe we're changing the numbers, maybe they're going down means that, hey guys, we're getting you to start talking. In the younger age group, that age 10 to 34, it's the second leading cause of death. And when you think about anybody who's in their working years, so maybe 25 to 65, overall, it's fourth leading cause of death in that age group. So you can maybe start to see why we need to talk about this, right? For every suicide, there are 25 other people who attempt suicide. So that equates to about 1.4 million people every year who end up needing emergency services because of a suicide attempt. It doesn't include those who never go to get medical care for an attempt. But 1.4 million people, that's a lot of people, right? We also know that suicide impacts individuals and communities. Obviously, any loss does, right? But suicide leaves behind so many questions. Could have, should have, would have. Why did they say something to me? Maybe why didn't I see it? Were there warning signs and I missed them? We know that it really has an impact. So addressing that and connecting people is key. The CDC also likes these numbers. They like to put a dollar sign on any cause of mortality. But when it comes to suicide, they estimate that in 2016, for which this figure is for, it had a $69 billion impact on the US economy due to lost wages and earnings over the lifetime of those who died by suicide and those who made a suicide attempt. That's a really big number. So moving on from there, and I encourage you, there will be a couple of points in this presentation when I ask you to go ahead and put an answer in the chat box because I'll ask you some questions. I'll also ask you to do a little bit of movement. I know that you've been super engaged in all of these sessions that NYSBA has been putting on during this conference, and I know you can only absorb as much as what you're sitting on, right? So I am going to ask you to do some simple movements so that I can keep you engaged and answer a couple of simple questions. But let's talk a little bit about the research. Just so you know, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the largest nonprofit funder of suicide prevention in the United States. And that's pretty exciting to me. But we're still behind the power curve. It's really only been in the last 20 years that researchers have been looking at suicide and why people end their lives and what we can do about it. So we have a lot of work to do. One of the things researchers ask is, why do people take their own lives? And one thing that we absolutely know, it's very individualistic. There's not one single cause. Nobody just wakes up one morning and says, today I want to end my life. We know it's complex and there are multiple intersecting factors going on when somebody reaches that desperation point. We also know this: the large majority of people who die by suicide, they have a mental health condition present at the time of their death. Now, maybe it was diagnosed or undiagnosed, treated or untreated. Maybe they weren't even aware that it was, their mental health diagnosis or mental health condition was affecting their life and how they presented. But it's important to know that mental health conditions play a role. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But getting a thorough diagnosis and being really honest with a doctor is key. Reaching out and just getting help, period. It's a sign of strength and courage. I wouldn't think you were brave at all if you were having heart palpitations on a regular basis and having chest pain and refuse to reach out to your doctor. I'd be like, what are you, crazy? Let's get this taken care of, right? So it's the same thing with our mental health. All right, we also know this: 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health condition, and most don't go on to die by suicide. The current population of the United States is 330 some odd million people. So from my simple math, we'll say 320 million. Well, that's over 80 million people that will have some type of mental health condition at some point in their life. And that spans a big gamut, a big umbrella of mental health conditions. Maybe it's situational, maybe it's lifelong. But the vast majority of those people don't go on to die by suicide. So mental health can't be the only piece here, right? Otherwise, it'd be easy to say, well, if you have a mental health condition, you're at risk for suicide. And that's simply not always the case. Research shows us that there are some physical differences in the brains of people who die by suicide. Those areas of the brain and structure and function that control stress response and impulse control. Think about young people. If you have young people in your life, I'm 52, so it's not really me, but when I was a teenager and I have, 2 young adults in my house, my kids, I know that their stress response and their impulse control, especially before somewhere around the age of 25, can really not be very good, right? We're impulsive and nowadays we respond to stress by putting it out on social media. We want everybody else's opinion on what we should do. Well, if we know also that there's something going on with the brain and somebody who's at risk for suicide, in those areas of the brain that control stress response and impulse control, then maybe there's something we can do about that. We know by doing research and asking people with lived experience, those who have made a suicide attempt and thankfully lived, we know that most people are ambivalent. And what that ambivalence means is that part of them wants to live and the other part wants to die. And I would beg to differ and say they don't really want to die. They want to end their pain. Most people just get into a space where that pain becomes unbearable, whether it's psychological or physical. They want to end that pain, but there's ambivalence. So part of the job of research and prevention is connecting with the part of somebody that wants to stay alive, right? So we're going to talk about doing that. But the crisis line, that 1-800-273-8255 National Suicide Prevention Crisis Line, exists for that very reason. We know people are going to reach out, people are going to call because part of them wants to live. I work a lot in the veteran community, and I know folks that work for the Veterans Crisis Line, and they've told me that veterans will call sometimes and give a challenge and say, you know what? You have exactly 2 minutes to convince me that I want to live. That's ambivalence. That's somebody giving an invitation to say, I need somebody to connect me with that part of me that wants to stay alive because this other part is feeling very overwhelming. And also ambivalence. We also know that the perspective of a suicidal person has changed, right? Somebody can be thinking about suicide for a long period of time and never take action on it. But this is where I want to engage you a little bit and ask you to just do a simple thing with me. Put your arms out really wide to the sides and all. Just give yourself a good wiggle and a good stretch. But this is perspective when it's normal, right? We can look to the left, to the right. We can think about coping mechanisms and skills that we can engage in. We can think of people that we can reach out to, whether it be our best buddy or a trusted adult or a trusted friend, whatever that looks like. We can think about all of the options, right? But now take your arms, if they're still out, I hope they're getting a little bit tired, shake them out a little bit. Now bring them in together so they're almost touching. The perspective of a suicidal person becomes very narrow. It can happen very quickly. And a desperation point has been reached, and thinking becomes really limited. So the goal is to open up that window again, and we're going to talk about doing that. But we know that this space can last for seconds, minutes, or hours. So keeping somebody safe in that intense period, giving them time for that intense and suicidal ideation to subside and get help can be life-saving. Research also tells us who's at risk. We've talked a lot about, all this research stuff, but how do I know who's at risk or if I'm at risk? Well, risk factors fall into these three areas: health, historical, and environmental. Now, I love taking things back to physical health perspective. Remember, we were talking about cardiac health, cardiac arrest. If you look at this screen right now, health, historical, environmental, if your health, you have high blood pressure, historically, you have a family member, maybe your father or somebody else died due to cardiac arrest. And environmental, you have a really stressful work environment or home environment or whatever that looks like. Health, historical, environmental. The same things apply to our mental health. Health, historical, and environmental factors affect our mental health and put us at higher risk when those characteristics and conditions converge and cause higher risk for suicide. All right, so health factors, let's talk about these. I've already mentioned mental health factors, right? By far the most common throughout the United States and throughout the world is depression. It's the most common mental health condition. And it's treatable. All of these are treatable. It's not always easy, right? But treating heart health isn't always easy either. But mental health conditions are the biggest. Depression, bipolar disorder, which is harder to diagnose, higher risk, but not as prevalent in the population. All of these are things that people don't always associate with mental health conditions. And whether it's PTSD, psychosis, substance use disorders, or eating disorders, but mental health factors are one of the most common. Other health factors play into it, though. Maybe somebody has a mental health condition, but they also have serious or chronic health conditions. Maybe it's chronic pain or a serious head injury. There's a reason why researchers and doctors are very concerned about traumatic brain injury and concussions, because they're starting to make some connections that those things can lead to mental health conditions and possibly higher suicide risk. So knowing if there's the presence of a serious or chronic health condition in combination with a mental health condition is really important. Historical factors, when it comes to heart, it would be maybe a family history of heart disease, right? When it comes to our mental health, maybe it's a family history of suicide. And family is not always the people that you are blood related to. Maybe it's you've lost somebody very close to you. That's a historical factor. Maybe it's a family history of mental health conditions. If you were here in a live audience with me, I would ask you, how many of you sit around the Thanksgiving table with your extended family and talk about the mental health history in your family? We know who has diabetes. We know who maybe broke their leg this past fall or has a heart condition or something else. But we don't talk about mental health in our families. So knowing if there's a family history of mental health conditions is important. Childhood abuse and traumatic experiences that have happened in childhood are a historical factor. They're often the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. But whether that was emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse, childhood abuse is often a historical factor that adds to risk. A previous suicide attempt is a risk factor. And while we know that most people who make a suicide attempt and thankfully live and go on to get help and engage in protective factors, they don't go on to die by suicide. we do know that it is a risk factor, so it's important to pay attention to. And we certainly know that loss, historical loss in somebody's life, is a risk factor. Remember, in combination with other things. And when we talk about environmental factors, what is somebody's access to lethal means? We're going to talk about that piece in just a minute, but that means what is their access to a way of ending their life, whether that be a firearm, a bridge, medication, or whatever that looks like. Exposure or contagion is when somebody who is at risk is exposed to a sensationalized or graphic portrayal of suicide, it puts them at higher risk. Prolonged stress. I wish I could see you all, because I would ask you to raise your hand if you've been stressed out. I know you have. I know as brewery owners, boy, you've been asked to shoulder a lot during this last year, especially with so many regulations changing constantly and going back and forth. Keeping your business alive and afloat and engaging in your communities, taking care of your own mental health and your family's mental health. Maybe you have young kids at home that are homeschooling, and it's been stressful, right? So prolonged stress or a stressful life event, whether that's a job loss or a relationship loss, whatever that looks like. Environmental factors are often what's seen as the precipitating factor to a suicide. So this is what other people see. They see that environmental factor, right? That prolonged stress, that breakup, that job loss, that legal problem, the bullying, or something else going on. And what they don't realize is that maybe the person was at genetic risk for suicide due to their family history. Maybe they'd been diagnosed with depression, and their depression was making their stress at work increase, or vice versa. Maybe that person had started drinking more than usual. But unfortunately, people see that environmental factor and then they chalk it up to that. And that's what we end up looking for. What we need to be looking for and paying attention to is a myriad of things. Not always, we don't always know what somebody is going through. But within your own families, your own circles, your close friends, I hope that you're having some of these conversations. Don't let things get out of hand. You know, when it comes to mental health conditions, no matter, remember that umbrella, it covers a lot: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, psychosis, substance use, all of those. If those things are starting to really affect your life, your work life, your home life, and it's making it hard for you to engage, you're wanting to isolate, maybe you're not sleeping as good, 2 weeks is the limit. Don't let it go beyond 2 weeks. And reach out. Go get a thorough examination by your general practitioner. Please don't let it go beyond 2 weeks. When your mental health is affecting your daily life and how you're able to interact, please, my begging point here, don't let it go beyond 2 weeks. Go get a thorough evaluation. There might be something going on, but it might be that you need to reach out and get some help for what's going on. All right, maybe research can tell us if there's a biomarker in a blood sample that would tell us if somebody's at higher risk. Different types of intervention, psychotherapy, medication, whatever that might be. We have a long way to go, because if everything we were doing were working, there wouldn't be a suicide rate. But people are still dying by suicide. So the importance of research is that we keep doing it and we invest funds into doing that, especially in marginalized populations. All right, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and shake it out and wiggle just a little bit. I'm going to drink a sip of water. And do yourself a good little stretch if you need to. And let's talk about some prevention measures. These are all about you today. As business owners who have been through a more stressful year than ever before, chances are pretty good, right? Protective factors are the things we need to engage in to take care of our mental health. And please, by all means, remember that it is a brave and courageous thing to do. It's a sign of strength when you reach out and get help and take steps to improve your mental health, okay? So mental health care is one of the most important. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but family and community support, especially during this prolonged time of COVID, when we're more isolated than normal. But family and community support, they're normally pretty strong, right? But when you're in the throes of a really difficult time, maybe heading toward crisis, you might start to change, or your loved one might start to change, and that causes those family and community supports to erode and weaken over time. That's when somebody needs to be reminded that they're cared for, that you're there for them and you support them. Problem-solving skills are a protective factor because life gets difficult, right? But knowing what to do, knowing that you have skills at your hand that can help you solve those problems is a protective factor. Sometimes it means taking a 5-minute break and stepping away and just thinking about, all right, what's the best approach to this? For me, when it's cold out like this and I start to get in my headspace a little bit, one of the quickest things I'm able to do to get my mindset out of that spiral, right, is to go outside and take a couple of really big, deep breaths of really cold air. And if it's summertime, open up the freezer and do the same, or go into your walk-in freezer and do the same, right? But knowing when to step back, take a breath, and practice the pause. Cultural and religious beliefs are certainly a protective factor because they encourage a sense of purpose and community and belonging and connectedness. So those are some of the protective factors, right? We know, I said I'd talk about mental health care again. Mental health is probably the most important ingredient because if we're proactive about taking care of our mental health, then chances are really good that we can protect against suicide. The challenge is that we need to create a culture where everyone, each and every one of us, knows that it's smart to talk about mental health and to take care of our mental health. One of the challenges on top of that is that only 2 in 5 people with a mental health condition will seek treatment. All right, so go ahead and as I'm talking here, pop into the comments, why aren't we seeking help? Why aren't we talking about this? What causes this to be a problem? If you remember, I said, the population, roughly a quarter or so, let's say 80 million Americans will have a mental health condition at some point in their life. And only 2 in 5 of them are seeking treatment. I know y'all are being shy because I can see the chat box. And there's nobody. Oh, wait, we have an answer. Cost. Yeah, not expecting it to help. What else? Don't be shy. Go ahead and put your comments in here. Why don't we reach out? Why aren't we 100% honest with our doctors? Right? Shame, embarrassed might impact your employment. Yeah, absolutely. Right? There's so much stigma around this mental health space that we don't want people to know. We're okay if they know we have a broken leg, but we don't want them to know if we're struggling with our mental health. We're afraid it's going to impact our job. We're afraid it's going to impact the way other people look at us. So we really need to change that by creating a culture where everyone knows it's smart to take care of our mental health and talk about it. In the AFSP world, we talk about #RealConvo, and it's all about having a real conversation. I've shared so many great resources with Megan, and I know that she has posted a lot of those within the members community. And I encourage you to engage in those resources because there's some great ones, but #RealConvo is one of the best. Talks about how to have a real conversation, how to reach out because it's awkward, right? Especially for guys. All right, I lost my mouse. Sorry about that. All right, being proactive about your mental health means you make it a priority. You see a doctor or a mental health professional, you are 100% honest with them. Raise your hand if you are 100% honest with your doctor. I can't see all of you, but I know that chances are good most of you are not 100% honest with our doctor for those same reasons, right? And somebody mentioned that there are those barriers to care. If you're a brewery owner, you may not have an EAP, right? So where do you reach out? Who do you go to? Where do you find those resources? So know what's available in your community. If you don't know, contact me and I will let you know. I'll connect you with the folks in your community. Just about every county in New York State has a suicide prevention coalition. They're some of the best people to engage with when it comes to resources, whether it's for you or one of your staff members or a family member, because yeah, we don't always have insurance, right? But there are always resources within your community that are free or low cost. And there are always people that you can reach out to. So find out what those treatment options are. Talk about what works best, because it's not a one size fits all. Not everybody is cut out to do talk therapy. I tried to make my 22-year-old son, when he was in middle school, I tried to make him go to therapy. You know, he had lost his dad, and I wanted him to talk about that. He didn't want to talk about that. So after a year, his therapist was like, Karen, he's not going to talk about it. We talk about history and movies and politics. We don't talk about the hard stuff. I can't crack him open. And my son, being a teenager, just looked at me and said, yeah, I told you, Mom. I was like, all right, I get it. I get it. So find out what works best for you. When I do this program for first responders, I've been in lots of firehouses with a room full of primarily men. And I ask this question, like, what do you do when you need to de-stress? They said, grab a beer with my buddies. I'm like, well, okay. And you all are brewery owners. So yeah, that's the natural thing to do. But sometimes that's when somebody's going to really kind of loosen up and start talking to you and give you an open door to have a conversation. Don't be afraid to step through that door and be proactive with the people that you care about. All right. Insurance, well, this is always evolving and changing. I know not everybody has insurance, but if you do, they have to treat mental health on the same level that they do physical health. And we can only hope that this keeps changing and evolving in a good direction. All right, so self-care. I wish I could see all of you and have you raise your hands. I can see a few of you. So the question here today is, how many of you actually exercised today? And that could mean a 15-minute walk. How many of you raise your hand if you actually moved your body today? And no, traveling from upstairs to downstairs does not count, or your car to inside your building. All right, I'm guilty. I haven't moved my body yet today, and I know I need to. Even moving your body for 15 minutes and taking a walk, it doesn't mean you have to do a marathon, right? All right, yeah, Chloe, good for you. She says, I will be doing it this afternoon. I hope you all have a plan to move your body in some way, shape, or form this afternoon, if you haven't already today. Yeah, every morning, trying to walk or run, just getting that walk in every day, getting some fresh air. It's not the be-all, end-all, right? But we have to move our bodies. Sleep. How many of you got a great night's sleep last night? I actually did. I hope that most of you did, but know that if you're not sleeping well and your anxiety or anything else is regularly interfering with your sleep, that there are things that you can do. I'm sorry you never get a good night's sleep. Sleep is so important. A lack of sleep can literally be life-threatening. Yes, Chloe, it is. Sleep is so important. Your mental health really starts to deteriorate when you're not getting consistent good sleep. So there are things you can do. You know, there's, does anyone after kids? Only when they become teenagers. My daughter still lives at home. She's 19. My son is 22. I hardly ever see him. He lives 10 minutes away, but my daughter, if she's not working, will sleep until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So you will get sleep someday if you have young kids. I can promise you that. But a lack of sleep can kill us, okay? So we want to get sleep. Reset that circadian rhythm. I know you might keep really late hours. I mean, you run a brewery, for goodness sake. Your evening hours are your best hours, right? So making sure you compensate for that and try to go to bed at kind of the same time and get up at the same time every day. There's so many things out there to help us get good sleep. Limit that caffeine intake and alcohol consumption after it gets late in the evening. Not eating a bunch of sugary food. I can go on and on. This is so important. Healthy diet. All right, pop question. Where is serotonin? 90% of serotonin in your body. Serotonin is a feel-good hormone. Helps us regulate our good mood. We need it for good mood. Where is 90% of the serotonin in your body made? Anyone want to take a guess?
Your gut.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, Chloe gets the bonus round today. It's made in your gut. And what are you feeding your gut? You have all these like billions of microbes in your gut and you want to keep them happy. You know, when I do programs for high school students, one of the questions I ask is, what'd you eat for breakfast today? And they say things like nothing. And it's 11 o'clock and they're wondering why they're falling asleep. They have no fuel and they've been up since 6 in the morning. Or they give some combination of Starbucks, Red Bull, and Pop-Tarts. So sugar, sugar, and sugar. We're eating, you know, our society is sustained on refined foods and processed food, or refined sugar and processed foods. And then we're wondering why, as a whole, our mental health is suffering. And a healthy diet is really important. And stress management, knowing when you need to take a step back. If you're like me, if it is to be, it's up to me. I want to control things. I want to be able to be the one that does it, right? It's hard for me to step back and give control to somebody else. And I have the feeling as business owners, some of you are the same way, but knowing how to manage your stress, knowing where you can step back. Again, cardiac arrest or cardiac health, your doctor's going to tell you all of these same things. And maybe they'll tell you on top of this, take medication. Often in the mental health field, medication and talk therapy or some kind of talking to somebody goes hand in hand. Like I said, it's not one size fits all, right? All right, so supporting people who have lost someone. Remember, we already stated that that's a risk factor. If that's you and you've lost somebody in your life, I want to tell you personally, I know you would do everything you could to go back in time and change that if you knew what you knew now. But you didn't know then what you know now, because so often what we know is in hindsight, and hindsight's not our friend. But know that there is a community out there, knowing that there are so many people who have been impacted by the loss of a loved one, and being able to connect with those folks is really important. And whether it's a support group or whether it's engaging in our Healing Conversations program, it's a one-on-one call with somebody with a similar loss so they can just listen to you. Because we want to talk about the person we lost. We want to be able to tease it apart and answer those questions, right? So supporting somebody who's lost somebody and supporting those with lived experience. So if somebody's made a suicide attempt, we know that's a risk factor for suicide, right? So giving those people support is a protective factor. I like to think of it as postvention is prevention. When something has happened and all, that postvention care is really important. The most important thing we have is time. If we can open up that window, remember when we put our arms out wide and we brought our hands together and narrowed that perspective, the most important thing we can do is open up that window and put time and distance between somebody's acute suicidal ideation and the means of ending their life. We can talk about what that looks like. Limiting access to means. We know because of research that this is one of the biggest ways we can prevent suicide. You see, because when somebody is in that space, if you take away their means of ending their life, the chances are really good they're not going to substitute with another means. So what does that mean? Maybe it's an easy fix. Maybe car manufacturers start putting a carbon monoxide sensor on cars so that if the carbon monoxide level gets too high, it shuts off. Maybe not so much the case in newer cars, but it still happens. And it could have been a $5 fix years ago. Maybe it's barriers on bridges. It's shown statistically that when there are a large number of suicides in an area due to a bridge, when they put those bridge barriers and safety nets up, the number of suicides go down because somebody's not substituting in that moment of crisis, right? Blister packaging for medication. You're concerned about yourself or somebody in your household, request that prescription medications be in a blister pack. You know, those annoying little foil packets that they're individually sealed in there and you have to work to get them out. What have we just done? Think about somebody who's reaching a crisis point. They've added in alcohol. They're not thinking clearly, right? Logical thinking is just not happening. And now they have a bottle of pills. In this narrow perspective, If they can simply dump a bottle of pills, we may not be able to intervene and get them help, right? But if somebody has to argue with a blister pack of medication, they can't just dump out a bottle. We've just opened up that window a little bit. And don't forget that there's that ambivalence piece, right? If we can open that window, we can hopefully give somebody time to intervene. We can give that person just enough of a window that they're able to maybe, just maybe, engage in that conversation that they had with their friend that said, hey, if you ever find yourself in that hard spot, call me. We need to open that window. The biggest piece of this is securing firearms. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention does not have a political stance on firearm ownership. It's a right in the United States, right? But what we do want to talk about is means safety. If you have a firearm in your home, then we need to have a conversation about how you're keeping yourself or your loved ones safe. Because firearms account for over 50% of all suicides, and it's the most lethal means. Chances are pretty good you're not going to survive a suicide attempt with a firearm. So knowing that if you have a long arm, a shotgun or a rifle, that legally in New York State, you can give that to a neighbor, your best friend, and say, I need you to hold on to this temporarily for me. It's not a matter of you have to turn it over to law enforcement or something, or somebody has to come and take those away. But knowing what the laws are in New York State, and knowing if you own a handgun, that you can either sign that over to another permit owner. If you're not willing to do that, then get a lockbox. Put that firearm in a lockbox and put your loved one's photo on it. Store that ammunition separately, and then take the keys and put them in a safe space. The Veterans Administration has taken this initiative so seriously. They have an initiative called Freeze the Keys. And the prototype is in the final stages, but it looks like a tall cup. It's made out of some kind of silicone material. And in that cup is a little insert right in the middle with a notch in it. You take those keys to either your gun lock or your safety box, and you put them in that little piece, and then you pour water in and you freeze it. Let me tell you, that prototype that they've made, you can't simply pop that block of ice out and unfreeze those keys. It's hard. It takes time. What have we just done? We've opened the window. If somebody has to engage in time, then we've opened up that window and we can save a life. It is so important. I can't tell you how many parents. My husband died 15 years ago. I've been doing this work as a volunteer and now as a staff member for a long time. I can't tell you how many family members I've met that somebody in their household got easy access to a firearm. It's not a question of ownership. It's a question of safety. All right, so this is the last section, and then we're going to be done. So go ahead and give yourself another little stretch if you need to, simply because it feels good. What can you do? If you're in this space today here with me, you're not a mental health professional. I'm guessing you're not. Maybe you had a background as a mental health professional, and now you're a brewery owner, which is really cool. But chances are really good that even as a medical professional, you didn't have a lot of training and what we can do to prevent suicide and engage in conversation. So let's talk about that piece. Have a conversation. We'll talk about what that looks like. Sounds simple, but it really is. We're going to watch for the warning signs. We're going to reach out and we're going to seek help. So let's look at all three of those. If you think about suicide warning signs in a slightly different light, think about them as invitations for help. Somebody that's reaching a crisis point is going to give invitations. They're going to give subtle clues that they're in crisis. But the challenge here is that they might be really subtle. So you need to have your radar up. And this is where remembering those risk factors kind of comes in handy. If you're concerned about somebody and your radar is up, these are the things I want you to pay attention to. Their talk, their behavior, and their mood. Somebody who's reached a crisis point is going to talk about it in some way, shape, or form. They might even joke about it. They might say something really off the cuff and laugh. But it's an open opportunity then for you to start a conversation. We can talk about what that looks like, but maybe they say, oh man, sometimes I just don't even want to be here anymore. Or maybe it's a little more serious and they say, I just feel like people would be better off without me. or I feel like I'm a burden. It's one of the things my husband said is that he felt like he had put the kids and I through so much. He felt like we'd be better off without him. That's not logical, because we certainly weren't better off without him. But remember, logical thinking isn't happening. So somebody who's reaching a crisis point is going to talk about it. They might text about it. They might Snapchat about it. They might sit in your brewery space and have a conversation with one of your staff members about it. They feel trapped. They feel like they're in unbearable pain and things are never going to get better. They're going to talk about it. Somebody's behavior is going to change. Think about characteristics or conditions in somebody's life that become uncharacteristic, right? Things that they don't typically do. So maybe that's an increased use of alcohol or drugs. They're drinking a lot more than usual. It's definitely a reason to talk to somebody, right? Like, what's going on? I care about you. Maybe they're having issues with sleep. They're sleeping way too much, too little. They're acting recklessly, taking risks that they wouldn't normally do. They're withdrawing or isolating from friends and family. Again, during a pandemic, those are hard to tease out, right? So we have to look at all three and really consider what's going on in the bigger picture and not be afraid to have a conversation. Maybe they've done some research and they're looking online for a way to end their life, or maybe they're giving away prized possessions. If my best friend gave me the thing that was most meaningful to her, I might not think that she's thinking about suicide, but you can bet I'm going to ask, why are you giving this to me? I know it's so meaningful to you. No problem. Somebody's got to go. That is not a problem at all. All right. Their mood. All these moods that you see on the screen are things that we would expect of somebody who has reached a crisis point, right? Depression, impulsivity, humiliation, anxiety, rage, irritability. Somebody's getting really irritable with you. It's a reason to have a conversation. You got to remember that the person might not be thinking about suicide, but maybe they need somebody to give them permission to talk about what's going on in their life because something has changed. And the one mood that is not on here that I want you to remember is that we're talking about any change in talk, behavior, and mood. So somebody, if you have a staff member or a family member, a close friend that has been kind of withdrawn or depressed, you're not sure what's going on, and then they show up to work one day and they seem really happy, it's also a reason to have a conversation. On the day that my husband died, he'd been very depressed. The 2 months leading up to that, very isolated, not wanting to be around people. Remember, he was Mr. Social. And on the day that he died, he was the happiest I had seen him in a while. He was engaging. He was laughing. He wanted to eat lunch, which he hadn't wanted to do yet. He had no appetite. And I thought, oh, he's turned a corner. This is good. He's feeling better. But remember, it's a change in talk, behavior, and mood. And that was probably one of the biggest red flags. So my husband's mood totally changed opposite of what it had been the day before. And maybe that indicates that they've made a decision. So it's so important. I know that's a lot to watch for. We've talked about those health, historical, and environmental risk factors that we might not know about somebody. And we've talked about those warning signs, those invitations for help that cause us to lean in and listen, that talk, behavior, and mood. So trust your gut, and please assume that you're the only person that might reach out. How do we reach out? And this is the last piece. As non-mental health professionals, not sitting in somebody with them and having a therapy session, how do we talk to somebody? Well, number one is please talk to them in private. Don't ever address it in front of other people. Listen to their story. If you are like me, raise your hand. You have the hardest time asking a question than shutting your mouth. It's so hard for me to ask and invite somebody into that brave space and then to just shut my mouth. The other word we can make with listen is silent. Sometimes we need to just allow for that brave space and ask a question and then be silent and not fix it. Express concern and caring, especially when it comes to that men-to-men peer relationship. It's so important that you express that there is absolutely no judgment. This isn't weakness. It's all about caring and compassionate. You're my friend, you're my brother, you're a person I really care about, and I want to be here to support you. So what does that look like? And then breaking down that myth that asking directly about suicide plants the seed. It simply does not. Research has shown us time and time again, we can't plant the seed if they're not thinking about suicide. We can't plant that seed. So we have to ask directly. Somebody may not be thinking about suicide, but we need to know. So asking directly might look like, hey, I know that you are really overwhelmed and I've been a little concerned about you lately. You know, you missed a couple of shifts at work and I know that, family stuff is pretty difficult right now. I want to ask you a question. Has it ever gotten so difficult that you've thought about suicide? Or have you ever gotten so overwhelmed that you've thought you don't want to live anymore? You see, when we ask people, are you okay? What that says to them is we're not okay with the answer. We're really hoping that the answer is, I'm fine. It's the exact question I asked my husband that day when his mood seemed to change. He seems to be happy. I said, are you okay? And he said, I'm doing great. I said, oh, okay. We want to ask directly. If we're concerned enough about somebody that this is on our radar, ask directly. Don't be afraid to say the word suicide. It might be the bravest thing you can do, and it might be that door that opens them to get help. And then encourage them to seek mental health services, whether that's seeing their general practitioner or calling the local number. And here in Monroe County, and I don't know what it is in your county because you're all over New York State, but knowing that most counties have some type of 211 number where they can call and see where they can go. They can call and request a mobile crisis unit to come and do a full evaluation without having to go to the emergency room. That it doesn't have to be escalated to a mental health arrest and police officers showing up. That you can sit there and call with them. I encourage you to call the crisis line once, just yourself, and say, hey, this is just a test. I wanted to know what this was like. In case I need to call for somebody else, I want to know what this is all about. Know that there's a crisis text line. I'll show you both those numbers in a minute. But then also know that there's some things we shouldn't do, like minimizing somebody's feelings. It's usually our go-to. We want somebody to feel better, so we tell them about our own experience, right? And what we did to feel better, and that tends not to help. And avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living, because philosophical conversations when somebody's in this space or heading toward a crisis point, those conversations tend not to work. They make somebody feel worse. If you've done that before, I have, it's okay. There's really no wrong thing you can say. But if we can, we want to avoid these things and avoid advice on how to fix it. Because if somebody were having a heart attack, we wouldn't say, if you ate better and exercised more, you wouldn't be in this situation, right? So don't try to fix it for them. Somebody needs to be asked, listened to, and led to help. If you think they might make an attempt, by all means, stay with them until somebody else is able to connect with them and keep them safe. If it's safe for you, help secure or remove lethal means, whether that's a pill bottle or a firearm, but make sure it's safe for you. And if it's not, then you need to get out of that situation and call 911 immediately. Or escort somebody to mental health services, or call that crisis line number, or text that text line number together. Let somebody know, I'm there, I support you. There are things out there. There are people that want to help, including me. These are good numbers to have in your phone, so make sure that you have them. Because of advocacy efforts, that 1-800-273-8255 long number is going to be changed to 988. It's already passed legislation, and it's going to take time to implement that number across the United States. It's not an easy change or fix, but boy, remembering 3 digits instead of having to remember a long number is really helpful when you're in crisis. For emergencies, please don't ever hesitate to call 911, especially if it's a suicide attempt in progress. You think somebody is maybe they've had consumed alcohol, and you think they've taken pills, or they have access to a firearm or something. Please call 911. Because we can do this. We can create a culture that's smart about mental health. It all begins with us taking care of our own mental health, because I do believe, and I hope that after spending this hour with me, that you also believe that talk can save lives. but it starts with you and me. These are our South Central and Central New York chapter information, but I will certainly share these out with Megan for all of our chapters across New York State so that you can get more information about our chapters and what we do. And last of all, I wanted to share my husband's picture with you. As I said, he was an officer with the 82nd Airborne Division. My son is 22 now, but this is when he was just a little guy. He was the kind of guy that would have lit up the party. He died in 2006 before craft breweries were a thing. And let me tell you, he probably would have lived at some of your establishments because he loved connecting with people and just being in that kind of environment. So knowing, again, and I'll stop sharing my screen now, but knowing that often that space, whether it's a winery or in your space, a brewery, that's somewhere where people might be having one of these critical conversations and that there are things you can all do. So it is 3:30. I didn't mean to go the full 3:30, but if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And if you need to know how to connect with any of our chapters, you can certainly reach out to Chloe or Megan, and they will connect you to us. For free staff training, if you want to maybe do an event in your community and engage with our chapters that way. Yep, my friend Chloe just put the blog in there that was written. It was written by my friend Tracy. She is a brewery lover. She's been to, I don't know how many breweries in New York State. She's always finding new ones and always posting about them on Instagram and Facebook. And she loves New York State Brewery Association, but she lost both her husband, or I'm sorry, she lost her brother and her father. So it's a great blog if you haven't read it. All right, Chloe, I'm going to close my mouth, and I thank you all for giving me your time and attention today.
Oh gosh, Karen, thank you so much for the presentation and all the information. If we can go over just a few minutes here if anyone wants to ask questions before we sign off. Does anyone have anything on their mind that they wanted to ask?
Anyone want to enter into that brave space? If I can give you a few more resources, and if you feel free to put it in the chat or just email me if you have a question that you want to ask and you don't want to ask it here. But if you have teens or young adults in your life, there are some great resources out there, such as Seize the Awkward. SeizeTheAwkward.org was put together by the Ad Council, Jed Foundation, and AFSP, and it's really all about having that awkward conversation. And again, you can go to afsp.org/real convo for tips on how to have a real conversation with people that you care about.
Thank you, Karen.
Absolutely.
And just to remind everybody, this session is recorded and we'll get it up on the New York State Brewers Association YouTube page, so you can watch it or share it with your staff. And again, Karen, we thank you so much.
You are so welcome. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.